our first forum. We're going to welcome incumbent Drew Ferguson and challenger Chuck Enderlin, both running for U.S. House of Representatives, District 3 here in Georgia. Gentlemen, thank y'all very much for being here tonight.
Thank you.
I'm joined, by the way, right behind me by Shelley Phillips of Coweta Fayette EMC, who is going to serve as tonight's timekeeper. And thank you very much, Ms. Phillips, and thank you again to Coweta Fayette EMC for sponsoring this forum tonight. Gentlemen, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to open our forum with 2-minute statements. That's going to be followed by a series of questions with 1-minute answers, and the opportunity also for a 30-second rebuttal therein. We're going to stagger our questions, so neither one of you will be the first or the last to answer each time. Mr. Ferguson is going to be the first of our candidates to make his 2-minute opening statement in just a moment, followed by Mr. Enderlin, and that way Mr. Enderlin is going to be the first person to answer the first question of the evening, and so on. Again, you're going to be given a warning by Ms. Phillips when your time is nearly up, about 10 seconds or so, and then a signal when the time is completely up. Of course, if she does that and you're in the middle of your thought, please don't stop your thought. Go ahead and finish it, but just try to keep us going throughout the evening. So, with that, we're going to start our forum and start with our opening statements. Each of you should use some portion of your opening statement to tell us a little bit about yourself personally and professionally, and tell us why you have chosen to seek office. We will start tonight with Mr. Ferguson.
Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for the chance to be with you. I'm Drew Ferguson, running for I'm the Republican candidate for the 3rd Congressional District of Georgia. I was born and raised in West Point, Georgia, grew up there, moved back home after attending the University of Georgia and graduating from the Medical College of Georgia, and opened a family dental practice. And in the 25 years that I was there practicing dentistry, I saw my community really begin to fall on hard times. We saw what happens when you lose jobs and you lose your manufacturing base. And we decided to get involved in our community and try to rebuild it, and we did. And now our community is part of a thriving district here with a strong manufacturing base. And the lessons that we learned at the local level were things that we thought we could take to Washington, D.C. to help make America the most competitive place in the world to do business. The things that we focused on were getting the regulatory environment right, getting the tax environment right, and making sure that our young people had the correct pathways in education to take advantage of a 21st century economy. We've done that in Washington, D.C. Our economy is growing at a record rate, and we have more jobs being created than we have people applying for work right now. We have been able to do that by fixing the regulatory environment, creating a tax system that not only benefits the middle class, but also completely changes the international business code. And now we've eliminated the reasons that a company would leave the United States to go overseas to locate their headquarters. We're seeing tremendous progress. We've changed our mantra in education, and now we're looking for many new pathways, just like you do right here at the CEC in Newnan, to make sure that our children are connected with a growing economy. If we continue to do this and we continue to focus, we'll have the resources that we need to make sure that, number one, we can fund our military to defend our freedoms around the world, make sure that we have the resources to pay down our national debt, and most importantly, do the things necessary to continue to make sure that our freedoms are protected, including health care. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Enderlin, your opening statement.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming tonight. I'm Chuck Enderlin, and I'm the next congressman from Georgia's 3rd Congressional District. Now, we as a nation are at a crossroads right now. Our deficit is up to almost $1 trillion. Healthcare costs continue to rise faster than inflation. Middle-class taxes are actually set to rise every single year. Corporate profits are up, but real wages are not keeping up and are actually falling. Each day, hundreds of brave men and women enlist for a war that started before they were born. And at the same time, veterans are coming home to a country that refuses to fulfill the obligations we owe them for fighting America's battles. High schoolers graduating next year will struggle to find a job that pays enough so they can support themselves. College students will face taking on a mountain of debt just in the hope of finding a career. And we have great programs here at Coweta, like the Georgia CAP program, but even great programs like that can't help everyone. But we can build that brighter future. In 43 days, Georgians will go to the polls and vote on our direction. For the first time in decades, voters in Georgia's 3rd Congressional District can vote for a candidate that will fight for a living wage. They can vote to build roads, bridges, and expand broadband internet to our rural communities. They can vote to ensure our hospitals stay open and that Americans can purchase Medicare. and they can vote to keep our promises to our veterans, ensuring that our VA is focused on providing the specialized care rather than simply selling it off to the lowest bidder. But we can't do these things if we don't come together, listen openly to each other, speak honestly, and find those points of agreement instead of putting up walls between us. That's the servant leadership I've practiced in my 15 years in the United States Marine Corps. And that's exactly what I will do as your representative, but only if you vote for Chuck Enderlin for United States Congress. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Enderlin. Both of you, in your opening statement just now, of course, talked about, as we would expect you to, the policies that are most important to you, the policy positions that you think are important to citizens around the 3rd District. Let me ask you a more personal question, sort of as a follow-up. Both of you also referenced somewhat your work and life experience, and I'd like you to expand on that a little bit. Take a minute each and tell us of how your life's work experience, particularly your professional or business experience, would likely guide your decision-making as a United States Congressman. We'll start with Mr. Enderlin first.
Absolutely. Growing up, my parents taught my sister and I to work hard, and they taught us to help other people. And those values of service led me to want to join our nation's military. I accepted an appointment to the Naval Academy, joined the class of 2003, and was commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant in the United States Marine Corps. For 11 years, I served on active duty wherever my nation called, at home and abroad. And I finished up my active duty career at NAS Meridian, Mississippi, teaching and training the next generation of naval aviators, not just on how to fly airplanes, but how to lead. I continue to serve in the Marine Reserves to this day. And that lifetime of service and that experience at the federal level brings us the experience and the judgment that we need to make these tough decisions. The fact that I'm a Democrat in the military can give you some confidence that I know how to reach across the aisle, to find those points of agreement, and to find the solutions that can work us together. In the military, we're not concerned about where you're from, what you do, what you think. We're concerned about getting the right results and getting results that help everyone. That's what I can do as a U.S. Congressman.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ferguson.
Sure, and it wasn't that long ago, as I mentioned in my opening statements, that our community had really fallen on hard times. We had watched bad decisions in Washington, D.C. really destroy our hometown. And so we knew what it took to rebuild our community. And it really took reaching across the aisle. Most folks don't realize this, but I'm from a very blue city in a very red district. Our city is about 62% Democrat as the vote goes, maybe a little bit more now. And I was elected 3 times as mayor. And what we learned during that experience is that you've got to reach across the aisle, you have to be innovative, you have to be willing to listen. And one of the things that I think has been very special about this experience in Congress is I've been able to take that spirit of cooperation to Congress, and most people don't realize this, but this is the most bipartisan Congress in about the last 50 years. And most of the time when I say that to someone, they just shake their head and say, I can't believe that. But of a record number of bills that have made it to the president's desk to be signed, 68% of those bills are bipartisan. That's a pretty remarkable number in this day and age, and we'll continue to work because I know what it takes to reach across the line and be a productive member of Congress.
Thank you, sir. We'll start with a number of questions on several issues facing citizens. The first several will be on the United States economy, also the budget and so forth. Talk particularly about the economy itself. Official U.S. unemployment rate, and of course, if I give you any figures tonight that y'all disagree with, please go right ahead and disagree with them. We get it from the same news sources. But official U.S. unemployment rate continues a downward trend, posting at 3.9% last August, lowest level since the 1960s. Last week, U.S. Labor Department said the number of Americans filing for unemployment benefits reached the lowest level in almost 49 years. Gross domestic product increased at, I think, 4.2% annualized rate second quarter, fastest rate since the 3rd quarter of 2014. The economic news right now for the United States is relatively good compared to where we were a few years ago. So my question is, what do you think are the current prospects for the U.S. economy, and what's the best path forward to continuing our current prosperity for our nation? What are the policies most needed, and what should we watch out for? We'll ask Mr. Ferguson first.
Sure. To the first part of your question, what are the prospects for the U.S. economy going forward? They're very, very strong. Fundamentally, our economy is strong. We're creating jobs, and we are building momentum every single month with our gross domestic product. And that is a result, as I said, of making sure that we have the right regulatory environment and making sure that we have the right tax environment. One of the things that we did with the tax code is we created an environment where business can make decisions on what's right for its business and its employees, not provisions in the tax code, and we created fairness, and we created the environment where this is the country to make investments. Going forward, we know that one of the things that we have to do is continue to work on our trade environment. Look at what's happened in recent weeks. We have a deal with Mexico. We're on the verge of having one with Canada, and it looks like as of today we've had some good news with our South Korean allies as well. And I believe that ultimately what we're going to do is we will be able to make our economy strong with the help of our partners, so that we can go after the real threat to the U.S. sovereignty, and that is the cheating in the Chinese system.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Enderlin.
Mr. Ferguson, I agree that the U.S. economy does have a very bright future. It's because of the U.S. workers that we have. It's because of the labor force we have. We have a very highly skilled, but unfortunately, woefully underpaid labor force. Yes, unemployment is up. Median household income rose to the highest levels ever, $61,000 a year, according to the latest reports. And that's because more people are working more hours. More people in each household are working. And that's not how we can build strong communities. If both parents are having to work 40-hour weeks just to make ends meet, that's not giving them the time to care for their children or to be involved in their communities and help them out. If you have someone who's having to work 60+ hours a week, working 2 minimum wage jobs just to stay out of poverty, that's not honoring the dignity of their work. That's just making sure that they stay pushed down as low as they can. We need to raise our minimum wage to a living wage. But also, some of the policies we need to change. We need to end the disastrous tariffs that are currently wrecking our economy. I just spoke to members of Eaton Lighting, headquartered in Peachtree City in Georgia's 3rd Congressional District. Due to the tariffs announced last week, they're having to raise their prices again. This is the second time this year, and it's directly as a result of the tariffs. If we remove those tariffs, we can actually bring our competitive environment back up and help the American worker.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ferguson, rebuttal?
Sure. Look, the best way to have growing wages is to have a growing economy. And just look at what's happened in the past year. Wages are growing at their fastest rate that they have in well over a decade. And I will tell you this, I'm proud that the president is doing the necessary things to level the playing field with trade. Unfortunately, one of the only tools that we had to do that with is tariffs. But I am encouraged by the fact that the president left the G7 meeting with the statement that he would like to see a zero tariff trade environment with our partners. Truly what we need access to markets. Our workers need access to countries' economies that we don't have now. It is not the time to buckle. It is the time to stay strong and finish the drill and make sure that the United States comes out on top.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Enderlin, rebuttal?
Unfortunately, wage growth is not keeping up with inflation. That means that the purchasing power of the average American is going down each and every year. Tying the Tax Cut and Jobs Act to change CPI doesn't help with that. It exacerbates the problem and makes it worse. Every American who is working hard is faced with that trouble. And quite frankly, lying to them about, hey, your wages are great, isn't going to fix it.
Very good. We're going to move on to our next question, talk about a couple of questions actually about budgets and taxes. And Mr. Enderlin, this is going to be to you first. U.S. Treasury Department recently reported that the budget deficit monthly widened to $898 billion in the 11-month period ending in August, not monthly, but over that period, exceeding the Congressional Budget Office original forecast. Budget deficit rose by about a third in the October to August period, from $674 billion during that same period the year before. Spending has outpaced revenue. That has contributed to an overall debt, of course, not just that, but over several years of, I think, $21.5 trillion right now. What effect is it going to have on the U.S. economy, and what are our prospects for ending deficit spending?
It's going to have a humongous effect. We've already been through this in 2007 and 2008 when our economy collapsed under that crushing debt that we had from everybody and from mortgage debt. We're seeing that play out again. Mortgage debt is at an all-time high. The student loan debt since 2008 has more than doubled. That's simply not sustainable. Now, if we want to actually fix this and go back to it, the answer isn't more tax cuts for the rich. If you're having trouble paying your bills, you don't get a lower paying job. You work out and work harder and get that higher paying job. In the U.S. Congress, what we've got to do is ask the people at the very top to give up that third luxury vehicle, to give up that extra vacation, and to actually pay their fair share for society. I can promise you this, as your congressman, I will make sure that not only do we bring the deficits down, but we make sure that everyone making $400,000 or less actually keeps their taxes the same. We need to make those tax cuts from the Tax Cut and Jobs Act permanent, and the only way to really rein in that deficit spending is to elect people who don't believe in it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ferguson.
Well, listen, one of the things that I'm excited about being able to do in the coming week when I go back to DC is actually vote to make the middle class tax cuts permanent. That is something that we're anticipating a vote on this week, and it's something that is a vote that I'll be proud to take. And I will tell you this, we could have gotten that done the very first time if we had had just a few Democrats vote with us in the United States Senate. We did make it permanent in the House, and we didn't in the Senate. Not one single Democrat voted to give the American public a pay raise, and that is wrong. If you really want to get after deficit spending, the real answer is that we have got to have an honest conversation as a nation about mandatory spending. Mandatory spending is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the debt, and all the welfare entitlement programs. If we do not have that honest conversation, and we do not figure out a pathway forward on that, then 72% of our spending will grow to 78%, and in just a few years, that mandatory spending will consume all federal spending. We have to have that honest conversation, and I'm willing to lead it.
Thank you, sir. Rebuttal, Mr. Enderlin?
Yeah, I mean, we can complain about how hard it is to pass legislation when you control both chambers of Congress and the presidency, but that's not really the problem. If we want to talk about mandatory spending, Mr. Ferguson just passed or approved the House fiscal year 2019 budget, which cuts Social Security by $4 billion. It cuts Medicaid by $1.5 trillion, and it cuts Medicare by $537 billion. It takes our seniors, and instead of giving them the health care that they have worked for and promised for, it makes them go onto the open market to find what they can and to hope that the voucher from the government simply covers it. That's not the way that we fix this problem. That's not what we can do, and that's not how we keep our promises to our American seniors.
Thank you, sir. Rebuttal, Mr. Ferguson.
Yeah, I think that Mr. Enderlin's description of what happens in the budget process is completely wrong. I will tell you this, it is about having honest conversations about where we are with that. We have to fundamentally change what we're doing. We have to make sure that the promises that were made to our seniors are promises that are kept. But we can have an honest conversation about my generation and future generations, about what it means to work a little bit longer, what it means to be able to reform the system so that the people receiving those very needed and earned benefits right now continue to do so, and there is no cut. To simply stick your head in the sand and to say we're going to continue to spend and not do anything with it guarantees that every single senior will take a pay cut in the very near future when Social Security runs out of money.
We're going to move on to our next question. Both of y'all basically referenced the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017, passed last December. So let me ask you to expand a bit on that, just in general. What do you think about the tax restructuring under that act? What parts do you agree with, and what should be changed about our current tax structure? And Mr. Ferguson, we'll start with you.
The number one thing that has to be changed is we have to make our middle class tax cuts permanent, and also those for the small business community. I'll say it again, if we had had just a few Democrats vote with us on that bill, we could have done just that. But unfortunately, they stood on the sideline and decided not to participate in that process. Going forward, if we continue to refine our tax code, we continue to work hard to make sure that this is the most competitive place in the world to do business, we can stay ahead of other nations. We absolutely cannot wait 30 years to rewrite our tax code again. We must work on it every single year to remain competitive.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Enderlin.
Our leaders need to take responsibility for the things that they pass and the things that they don't pass. If we couldn't get those middle class tax cuts permanent under your watch, that's not a failure of the Senate. That's a failure of the people standing in front of you. But let's talk about the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, because there's a bunch of terrible things in it. One, those tax cuts do expire. So by 2027, if you make less than $75,000 a year, which is the majority of American households, you are better off under the old law, not under the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. The tax bracket increases are tied to changed CPI. This is the concept that as prices go up, you'll simply buy something cheaper. All this does is push people into a higher tax bracket than they would normally be in. This is the main reason for those problems, why Americans are seeing those stealth tax increases that we see every year. And like we just talked about, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was nothing more than an excuse to go after Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. It is absolutely unconscionable that we can create a record high deficit and then say, oh, we have to go after these entitlements now because of the laws that we passed.
Thank you, sir. Rebuttal, Mr. Ferguson.
Sure, I will go and I will say it again. This is the problem that we have when we start trying to have the honest conversation about Social Security and Medicare. One side stands up and uses it as a tool to go after the other one. I'm telling you, we have to have an honest conversation about it. And the jobs tax, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act did not go after Social Security. Matter of fact, it brought more people into the workforce to guarantee that we had more people paying into the system to help bolster that important program. It is something that we have to continue to fight for.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Enderlin, rebuttal?
Thank you. If we want to have that honest conversation about Social Security, it's real simple. If we get rid of the payroll tax cap, Social Security is secured for perpetuity. The only problem with that is we have to ask the members of the donor class to finally pay their fair share. That's why it's not being done, and that's why it will be done when we elect some Democrats in Congress.
Thank you, sir. We're going to move on next to another economic question. In this case, it's tariffs. Both of y'all had mentioned this somewhat. I believe this is correct. Over the last year, we've seen an increasing number of tariffs used in trade negotiations on everything wood to steel, paper to manufactured goods. Today, I believe, is significant. I think there were tariffs imposed on about $200 billion of Chinese products. Today, on top of about $50 billion in goods already charged higher duties earlier in the year. That combined $250 billion in products facing levies is about half the value of imports from China last year, if I understand this correctly. Meanwhile, about $60 billion in goods the U.S. would also become subject to Chinese tariffs at the same time, adding to the $50 billion already levied. So my question is, what do you think about this escalating use of tariffs in our trade negotiations with China and other nations, and what effect in the short and the long term will this have on the U.S. economy? Mr. Enderlin, I'll start with you.
Tariffs have proven historically to be a terrible tool for actually shaping trade volume, for actually changing the trade balance that we have. What we're seeing right now is that paying out. Like you said, Chinese imports of auto parts has been tariffed. The U.S. automotive industry is expecting $2 billion in lost sales and 700,000 jobs lost. That's not something that our economy can really sustain. They're expecting the average cost of an automobile to go up $5,800. And that's because that's exactly what tariffs do. They are a tax hike on the middle class. The National Taxpayers Foundation Union, a conservative think tank that is opposed to any and all taxation, has found that this current administration is responsible for the biggest tax increase on the middle class in our nation's history. And it is because of those tariffs. Tariffs have traditionally been the venue of the United States Congress. It is time that we elect members who are willing to be that co-equal branch, who are willing to stand up for Americans, and who are willing to stop these tariffs.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ferguson.
Fundamentally, I am absolutely opposed to increasing tariffs. I like free trade, and I will tell you this, the lesson that I have learned growing up in a community that lost its job and manufacturing base to Mexico when the textile industry moved away, to seeing our community completely rebuilt and thriving once again with advanced manufacturing and automotive. We know this. We have to do things well here first. We have to have the right regulatory environment, we have to have the right tax environment, and we have to develop our workforce. If those things are right, then the trade deals are the icing on the cake. And I will tell you this, ultimately, I think that we get to the point with our trading partners, both here in North America and Europe and the Pacific Rim, that we will be able to band together and we will be able to reduce tariffs across the board, and we will be able to stand strong against China. China continues to cheat, steal our intellectual property, and long term, that is bad for the American worker and it's bad for this economy, and we will stand strong to make sure that America continues to thrive.
Thank you, sir. Rebuttal, Mr. Enderlin.
If we continue this tax hike on the American middle class, we won't have a chance of standing up to China because we will stagnate our economy. Our economy thrives when Americans are out there and have the disposable income to go out and buy American-made goods. That is impossible to achieve when we are constantly adding 10% and then another 5%, then another 3% to the price they pay for goods. These tariffs are paid by consumers. That's it. The money is not coming from China. It is coming from American pockets. It is coming from American factories that are closing down, and it is coming from American jobs that are being lost.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ferguson, rebuttal.
Once again, I think that it's time to stand strong. All too often, elected officials buckle at the first sign of pressure, and that is one of the reasons that our trade deals are so bad, and we have seen so many American jobs over the past 2 or 3 decades leave our shores for other areas. Keep in mind, a combination of a growing economy, the right tax code, an improved workforce, making us competitive. This is the right time to be strong and stand up for America.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll move on to healthcare, the future of healthcare spending in the United States. Mr. Ferguson, you're going to be the first on this question. Affordable Care Act still stands, though without the individual mandate. The ACA's Medicaid and the ACA's Medicaid expansion, although it held as a whole, of course, was struck down some time ago. My question is, what is the Affordable Care Act? How is the Affordable Care Act faring at this point? And how will the different tensions about that act and debates about that be resolved, most likely? We'll start with you first.
First of all, the Affordable Care Act is anything but affordable. Since its implementation, we have seen premiums skyrocket, and it has hit middle-class families the hardest, particularly those small business owners. Keep in mind, as we go through this conversation, most every American, over 70%, receive their insurance through an employer-based plan. And I'll tell you, as this conversation moves along and we talk about Medicare for all, what we're talking about is robbing you of your right to have your plan come through your employer. And then we're going to put you on a government-run health care plan. And you're going to take a Medicare plan that is, quite candidly, that has been paid into by our seniors, and you're going to dilute it by giving it to everybody else. I don't think it's a smart move. The biggest fear that I have with the ACA right now is the vertical integration of our healthcare system. You now have pharmacies being owned by pharmacy benefit managers. Those are being owned now by insurance companies. The hospitals are next, and the providers are after that. That will completely eliminate the patient's choice and the right to choose the doctor that they want to go to.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Enderlin, you.
Well, Mr. Ferguson has accurately described what happens in the private sector in the absence of regulation, where corporations try to streamline and vertically integrate. That's not the solution that we're going to have if we're going to help our healthcare problems. Now, I want to talk about a friend of mine for a second. Her name is Heather Snell. She moved down here to Newnan to care for her family. When she moved counties, she lost her health insurance because she voluntarily gave it up to move. She couldn't find she had to change her heart doctor. She has a congenital heart condition. Without the Affordable Care Act, she wouldn't have been able to find the help she needed. She wouldn't have been able to get on a new plan because when she lost hers, her pre-existing condition would have kept her off future plans. And I'm not talking about Medicare for all, Drew. If you actually studied and listened to us, you would find out that I'm talking about a Medicare buy-in. You're worried about people not being able to keep their health care plans. They will be able to. They'll just have the option to take Medicare and purchase into it at the per capita rate. We could even make it budget positive and put a little pad on top of it if it helps satisfy the Republicans in Congress. But a Medicare public option gives people the chance to buy health care they can use, health care they can afford, health care they can take with them across state lines, and it allows the open market to find those efficiencies and encourages other health insurance providers to do the same.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ferguson, rebuttal?
Yes, I will tell you that that the vertical integration of the healthcare system, making it bigger, is not the right thing to do. I put a hand on a patient every day for 25 years. I cared for people across all backgrounds. Every one of us has a family member that has been touched by a chronic disease that is expensive to care for. There are many other ways to do this, but we have to remember this country has become confused between health care and health insurance and health benefits. And I think that we can find the right balance, but to me, putting more dollars into a government-run system is not the way to do it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Enderlin, rebuttal?
Healthcare costs continue to expand to the point that you can't get health care without good health insurance. And we talked about government plans. I had one of those for several years. It was called TRICARE. It was the best healthcare plan I could ever ask for. I showed up to a hospital, showed them an ID card, and I was good. I had several times where my wife called me and said, hey, before we take our kids to school tomorrow, you need to take me to the ER. I had security and comfort through that great health insurance that, surprisingly, was from the government. If we take a look and if we act smartly, if we take the lessons that we have, we can model it after TRICARE, or we can model it after Medicare. We can change the name if you want. But there is a solution out there. We just have to be willing to actually implement it.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll move on to our next question. Mr. Enderlin, this is going to go to you first. It's somewhat related, but I just want to get your thoughts on this. What action do you think Congress could take to better address America's ongoing opioid crisis? Mr. Enderlin, you first.
The opioid crisis comes from two things. We need better health care. We've talked about our ideas on how we can improve health care for Americans. But the other thing we have to do is we have to look at addiction, or drug addiction, as an addiction and not as a crime. That's the very first step for the victims. We have to make sure that victims are willing and able to come out and get help and not feel any shame for it, to not be ostracized for it, and to not face punishment for it. If they're seeking help, we need to help them do that. And the second thing we have to do is we have to go after those pharmaceutical companies. We have to go after them for providing those opioids, for encouraging doctors to overprescribe them. That's going to come through government action. That's the only way we can do it. That's what we've got to do to fix this.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ferguson?
In a bipartisan way this year, Congress passed over 53 pieces of legislation dealing with America's opioid crisis, dealing with everything from new treatment options to dealing with addiction, to the mental health side of it, and making sure that our fellow Americans are able to come back into society as full members when they recover from this terrible disease. Addiction is a terrible, terrible thing, and it touches way too many families. Almost every single family I know has had somebody that has been through this. We must act with compassion, and we must act in a very, very quick way. Unfortunately, this county has way too many young people that become addicted, way too many old people that become addicted, and it is destroying the fabric of our community. But another area that we have got to stay strong on is that we have got to secure our southern border to make sure that the opioid traffic does not continue to flow freely across that southern border.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Enderlin, rebuttal?
The opioids come from American producers. They are prescribed by American doctors. They are provided by American healthcare plans. If we want to tackle this problem, we have to look at the man in the mirror, and we have to start right here at home. We cannot simply blame other countries for the problems we face. We have to be willing to tackle them head on. That's what I've done my entire career as a military officer. That's what I'll do in Congress.
Mr. Ferguson, rebuttal?
I would say that many providers are doing exactly what Mr. Enderlin suggested, which is to look in the mirror and find new ways of prescribing. I know I did it when I was a healthcare provider and did it successfully. But I will tell you, we have drugs coming across that southern border every single day. The amount of fentanyl that comes across that southern border is enough to kill almost 300 million Americans every single year. Think about that. We have to stop. It's not just the pharmaceutical companies that are here. It is short-sighted only to blame what's here in America. That is part of the problem, but we have to be realistic to say that it is coming from other places around the world, and we must fight to stop that.
Thank you, gentlemen. I want to get your thoughts on a few other things before we finish up our forum tonight. So first one, and I'm going to go with Mr. Ferguson first on this one, infrastructure. Just what are your thoughts? What's America's biggest challenges when it comes to its infrastructure, from the interstate system to bridges to rural broadband or what have you? What are the biggest things we face right now, and how should we approach it?
Well, first of all, we do have many areas of this country that have crumbling infrastructure, and the biggest challenge is paying for that. And I will tell you, the Highway Trust Fund runs out in the next few years. And again, we have got to have an honest conversation about how we are going to fund that going forward. We simply cannot continue to fund it out of the general fund because we cannot keep the promises that we've made to our veterans. We cannot continue to fund opioid treatments and treat Medicare and educate our children, do all of the things that we need to do if we have to fund out of the general fund. But let me say this, one of the things that I am most passionate about is making sure that every single family in the state of Georgia has access to good broadband, every single community. We can no longer count on traditional economic development to go out and chase manufacturing for every single county in Georgia. We need a unique plan that ties broadband to the school system, to the education curriculum, and we need to be able to connect our young people in our rural districts to the economic hubs in our cities. I think if we do this smartly, we can accomplish this nationwide, but especially right here in the state of Georgia.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Enderlin.
Mr. Ferguson and I are in complete agreement on the importance of broadband internet and how we need to bring it in. We need to tie it to our schools. We need to tie it to our communities. We need to make sure that last mile of fiber is laid everywhere. When I travel down to counties like Upson County and visit Thomaston, their economic growth is held back because of that lack of broadband internet. But it's not going to happen just because we give Comcast some tax breaks and hope that they go build it. It's going to happen when we, the American people, say, hey, here's some shovels, here's some machinery, here's some fiber, let's go lay it. We're going to pay you $15 an hour at least to go out and do this, and we're going to make this happen. When we're done laying that fiber, we can give it to the communities to make sure that it's not simply profiteered off and leeching out of the people that need it so badly. If it's publicly owned, the communities can use it. They can use it to build their economies and bring everybody else up. It's not complicated. It just requires the will to do it.
Thank you, sir. Rebuttal, Mr. Ferguson?
Absolutely. For way too long, we've made the access to broadband about subsidizing either the provider or the end user. That has got to stop, and we have to treat broadband as critical infrastructure. As a mayor, we made strategic public investments in water lines, sewer lines, gas lines, and roads to create jobs and to create economic opportunity. It is time that we take that same approach on broadband and to make sure that we do everything that we can, both at the federal, the state, and the local level, to create that synergy to make this happen. And I think that we can do that.
Thank you, sir. I don't have another rebuttal coming, or do I? I do. I'm sorry. Go right ahead,
Yeah,
please.
we've had a congressman on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee for 2 years. We still don't have shovels going into grounds in counties like Upson County. That will change. I promise you, you will not wait 2 years when I'm your congressman.
Thank you, sir. Next question, your thoughts on education, specifically the way I was asked to ask this question, so I'll let y'all take this. What is the proper role, in your opinion, what is the proper federal role in setting education policy? And Mr. Enderlin, I'm going to go to you first.
So the proper role in setting federal education policy is real simple. We set the minimum guidelines that guide the country. Because let's face it, we are one nation. We're not just a loose collective of states. When people enlist in the military, they don't join the Arkansas militia or the Mississippi militia. They join the United States Army or the United States Marine Corps. And we need to make sure that in education, whether it's from California, New York, Georgia, Louisiana, Alabama, counts the same and is worth the same everywhere we go. The second thing that the federal government can do to help with that is we can help those states that are struggling with funding to help bring their teachers in. We can help not just with direct teacher pay raises, but we can help with loan forgiveness programs. Becoming a teacher requires at least 4 years of college education. This saddles our teachers with debt, and in many states, they don't pay or earn enough to be able to really pay it off. If we, as a federal government, allow the teachers who are working in those public schools to have their loans forgiven, we can solve our teacher crisis and we can improve education throughout the country.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ferguson.
The more you see the federal government involved in education and dictating to every single state and every single school district the way that they have to do it, you begin to see failure, and that's what we've seen. I am so proud of the work that's being done right here in the state of Georgia, and particularly in communities like Coweta with the Central Education Center. We have to allow flexibility, and we also have to recognize that not every kid has to go to college. I tell you what, I've got 4 children, very different backgrounds, all of them very, very bright. And I will tell you, they will all take very different pathways to success. And one of the things that we have got to do is provide enough flexibility to make sure that states and local communities can develop education systems to fit the needs of their growing economies. One of the most striking things to me about Congress is how different our nation is based on regions. Yes, we are one nation, but the way the Northeast thinks about things is vastly different than the Southeast, and the way we think about it in the Southeast surely isn't like California. We have to be able to account for that flexibility and to make sure that local communities have control of their education so that they can meet the needs of their growing economies.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Enderlin, rebuttal?
Local communities do have control of their education. When I talk with teachers and when I talk with students, it's frustrating because there's not a lot that the federal government can really do to influence those. I don't want people from West Virginia telling us how to run the Georgia schools that my children go to. And I'm sure the people from West Virginia don't want me doing the same thing for them. But what we can do is lay that foundation. We can help out, we can give the resources they need to succeed, and most importantly, like I said, we can make sure that every education, everywhere, that high school graduate is just as equipped for a job anywhere in the country, regardless of where they graduate.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ferguson, rebuttal?
No rebuttal.
All righty. Let me ask y'all then about immigration. And this question is going to go to you first,
Sure.
Mr. Ferguson. It seems like nationally, I'm not talking about between the two of you gentlemen, but nationally the debate over immigration has grown particularly poisonous. What's your solution to America's current immigration policies, and what do you think can actually be passed out of Congress? And I'll start with you, Mr. Ferguson.
Sure. I will tell you, of all of the things that I've seen in Congress, maybe even including health care, this is the most divisive issue in our country. And I will tell you what I think one of the reasons we have a conversation about illegal immigration and legal immigration. And one of the problems that we've got right now is that we're having a very visceral debate on two sides. Number one, what do we do to secure our southern border to stop illegal immigration? And what do we do with the young men and women that were brought here by their parents, but through no fault of their own, and that have been raised in America and have never been back to their country of origin? Those are two very visceral issues. And if you ask the DACA kids what they want, the list is long. If you ask them what they've got to have, it's to end the fear of deportation. I think that if we can secure our southern border and we can end the fear of deportation for the DACA kids, then we can begin to have a real honest conversation about legal immigration in the middle. We have to have a strong guest worker program. Talk to any business around this country and they will tell you that they need workers from around the world to come in and fill jobs that Americans simply are not equipped to or won't take.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Enderlin?
Unfortunately, the reality is that the largest source of illegal immigration is people who overstay their green cards and their visas. It's not from our southern border. But it's a divisive issue in Congress because it comes down to the heart of who we are. It comes down to the heart of who we see as people, and more importantly, who we see as Americans. My family immigrated here, I think, in the early 1900s. We don't really have any good records. Best I can figure, we came over from Germany during a period where they were executing Catholics for being Catholic. I have no idea how we got here. I have no idea how they moved to Arkansas. But all I know is that through hard work and through that American spirit, they accepted the values that we have in America. They work hard. They love their neighbors. And that's the kind of values that we have to bring in. If we want to talk about the DACA children, we've already answered that second visceral question of what do we do with people who have been here and are working hard. The Trump administration answer, and the answer supported by Congress, is to kick them out. United States military veterans who have served their country in Afghanistan, who have fought and bled on the fields of Iraq, are being deported because they lack the proper documentation or because they were brought here as children. That's not compassionate, that's not humane, that's not American, and that's something that we could have stopped if Congress was willing to do it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ferguson, rebuttal?
I'll tell you what's inhumane and not right, and that is to allow people that want to do us harm to continue to come across this border. We as Americans can absolutely recognize the diversity and the good things that come with people from around the country coming to become American citizens the right way, the legal way, and participating in our economy and making our lives better. But what we can no longer continue to do is to have people come across this border that join gangs, that are involved in human trafficking, that are involved in opioid addiction, and the number of terrorists that are caught every single day at the border. It is absolutely un-American not to defend ourselves against the people that want to do us harm here.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Enderlin, rebuttal?
We can defend our borders, and we can retain our humanity and our compassion. That's what we have to do to be American. When people come across the border of this country, they usually don't know how the American immigration system works. We don't exactly have schools set up in Mexico or Nicaragua so that people can learn, here's how to follow the American immigration system. If you want people to prioritize legal immigration, when we find them, when we catch them, bring them in. See where they're going to go work. See where they're going to get their green cards. Because the majority of people coming to this country are coming because they want to build a better life for themselves. They want to build a better life for their children. And if we welcome them, they not only build a better life, but we build a better country.
Gentlemen, thank you all very much for that. That comes to the end of our questions. We're going to move on to closing statements in a few moments. And of course, the time constraints being what they are, there may be any number of issues that we didn't get a chance to talk about tonight that y'all might want to. Please, in your closing statements, make sure you bring those up. But we are going to go to both of those tonight. We're going to reverse our opening order. And Mr. Enderlin, we'll start with you with a 2-minute closing statement.
I want to thank the Chamber for hosting this event, Dean for moderating, Congressman Ferguson for coming and sharing his views, and for everyone watching for becoming a more informed voter. Now, as I travel across the 13 counties of this district, I meet people who need help. Sometimes we see the results of great leadership through innovative programs like Carrollton's Farm to School program. And ideas like this can build that foundation for a strong future by helping each other. But I also see the results of leadership failures. I hear from people like Mayor Trammell in West Point, who worry that the new tariffs on car parts will cause the Kia plant to close and jobs to flee this town. I talk with Army veterans like Marcus, who can't get the care they need in Columbus, or worse, are ridiculed and insulted when they go to the VA for help. I listen to women like Madeleine Croteau of Noonan, who went without her heart medication, choosing instead to spend her life savings on medication for her grandson, Cole, because Cole's father couldn't get health insurance through his job. Now, I joined our Navy in peacetime. I answered our country's call when war came to us, and I continue serving to this day. We need proven servant leadership representing us in Congress. Men and women who understand that leadership is rooted in helping our neighbors and who strive to unite us to solve our problems. We don't find that unity by refusing to hold public meetings, but by having the courage to go and listen to each other. On October 4th and October 9th, Fayette County is coming together, Republicans and Democrats as one, to ask questions and learn about the candidates. But so far, only one of us has the courage to commit to attend. Only one of us is actually seeking that unity we need to build a better future. Your vote matters. Absentee ballots are available. Early voting starts October 15th. Election day is November 6th. If you want to join me in building a stronger country, help us out at votechuck.us and vote for Chuck Enderlin for United States Congress.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ferguson, your closing statement.
I ask everyone to think back just a few years ago to their mindsets about their jobs, about their small businesses, about their economy, about the fear that they had in their life. Think about where we were. And I think about sitting in Congress and hearing every single person on the other side of the aisle say that our economy can never grow again above 2% GDP, and we cannot rebuild our military, and we cannot take care of our veterans, and we cannot do the things that we have to as a country. I think about where we are now. I think about what's happening. Our economy is growing at the fastest rate. Unemployment is at its lowest rate in decades. Our military is being rebuilt. Our veterans, in fact, are being taken care of, and we have been fighting every single day to make sure that we reform the VA. We can do these things. We can do it, but we cannot do it if we return to the policies that told each and every one of us that are out there raising a family, running a small business, working hard, that we're the bad guy and we're the problem with America. We're not. We are part of the solution. We're not part of the problem, and we're going to keep fighting to make this country the most competitive place in the world to do business, to make sure that our people, our fellow citizens, have the dignity of work, no longer rely on the federal government, and we will continue to push this nation to new heights.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Thank you, Mr. Enderlin. We appreciate both of y'all being here tonight. We wish you both luck in November 6th, and we also thank you particularly for standing up and running for this important office. Gentlemen, thank you very much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.